Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Richard Fleming. Today is Friday, the 22nd of January, 2021. The topic of today's video is the origin of SARS-CoV-2 and the utilization of something known as gain of function. A considerable amount of controversy exists out there in the world, including social media and scientific sites, looking at the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to provide a better understanding of exactly what we're up against. To fully appreciate that, I've put together a brief video of information that is important for you to know to provide you some understanding of the concept of the term gain of function, the term chimer or chimeric, and some of the paper trail that shows who the players are, along with some brief video components of the individuals actually acknowledging gain of function and the work that they've been doing as SARS-CoV-2 has come into our lives. Most of this presentation will be a matter of me sharing, again, documents and materials for you to look at. For those of you who took Greek mythology in school, you may remember the combination of a lion, dragon, and serpent in the Iliad. Greek mythology and the plates from the time show this chimeric figure as a well-recognized concern of individuals. And it shows the combining of more than one creature into something that hadn't existed before. The Greeks aren't the only ones who have discussed chimers. In fact, it's so much a part of our vocabulary that it's the scientific use of the term chimeric that is used to discuss the merging together, putting together of more than one life form or organism, if you will. And in more recent times, many of you will be familiar with the term Frankenstein, which was a combination of a human taken from several different humans. So at least the same species, but not the same original individual. Some of you may have seen a few of these slides, and I want to go through them to briefly provide you some of the background of the work that was done by several scientists in the field of virology, the scientific area of viruses, dating back to the original detection of SARS-CoV, what should correctly be called SARS-CoV-1, since we now have SARS-CoV-2, by Dr. Sheng Li in 2002. And this was a Chinese physician, researcher, who was involved not only in coronavirus work, but she worked with other viruses as well, including HIV pseudoviruses, which she later admitted to inserting into the original SARS-CoV virus. Much of this work, not only regarding this virus, but how to address pandemics, has been paid for by US taxpayer dollars, including the research grants that were paid out to Italian, French, and Indiana University physicians and researchers to determine what to do in the event of a pandemic, as well as research work that was done on the coronavirus known as the Middle East respiratory virus, MERS, which had a fatality of 30 to 40%, detected in 2014 in Saudi Arabia and South Korea in 2015, where research on treatments was investigated and shown to potentially be beneficial if research was started early enough and with a combination of more than one drug to interfere with the viral attachment, replication, and inflammatory thrombotic process. By 2013, Sheng Li and the Wuhan team had isolated several viruses of the coronavirus family and attempted to work with a spike protein that was not currently able to infect human cells. By 2015, Dr. Sheng Li admitted and stated that she had re-engineered the spike protein, making it possible to enter human cells, simply allowing this to be done by inserting 2 single gene mutations. This was paid for by US taxpayer dollars from NIH and was presented in a conference that has since been deleted from the website, as has much of the Wuhan virology database. In fact, that data started disappearing from Wuhan in the middle of 2019, long before the rest of us knew that there would be a SARS-CoV-2 and a pandemic to address. In 2015, Dr. Sheng Li and Dr. Barrick from the University of North Carolina, who you're going to hear more of, published a paper pointing out that they had in fact generated and characterized a virus. Sorry, you can't see the little piece here, but in the left-hand part of this, let me go back to this, in this area of the text, so look here. We generated and characterized a chimeric virus. We generated and characterized a chimeric virus, something that had not existed before. And they proved, as you go down to the yellow part, that this evaded the ability of antibodies to be made from the original SARS virus to protect against their chimeric creation. By 2015, there was a concern among the scientific community and a call for action to stop new gain of function research. Government documents, as shown here, beginning with this one back in October of 2014, the US government gain of function deliberative process and research funding pause on selected gain of function research involving influenza, MERS, the Mediterranean or Middle Eastern virus, and SARS. Now, if you needed proof that gain of function research is legitimate, this is a government document issued in October of 2014, where the federal government of the United States has addressed the fact that it is paying for gain of function research and a question about what should and should not be included in new research. In light of recent concerns regarding biosafety and biosecurity, effective immediately, the US government will pause new, emphasizing new, US government funding for gain of function research on influenza, MERS, and SARS viruses. They go on to state, however, that the research funding pause would not apply to characterize or testing of naturally occurring viruses unless the tests are reasonably anticipated to increase transmissibility and or pathogenicity, something that SARS-CoV-2 and the research that I already pointed to a couple minutes ago distinctly points out: an increased ability of the virus to be infective and be transmitted. By May of 2016, after some calls for control, this document, a report of the National Scientific Advisory Board for Biosecurity, was issued. And in this, I want to point out just a couple, because this is a 109-page document. I want to point out that that statement here again is repeated in the document, carrying over unless the tests are reasonably anticipated to increase transmissibility and or pathogenicity. Now, as we go through the document, and you're more than welcome to pull this up on your own, you will see that the people involved with this include the NIH, select agencies of the Federal Institute Oversight Committees, Health and Human Services, and several other federal agencies, all within HHS framework. And you can see how this funding is occurring. On page 71 of the document, you will find out that at this conference, people like Ralph Barrick, Professor Barrick from the University of North Carolina, provided information at the conference. You will also notice, again, Ralph Barrick at the conference. So he shows up twice, including under public comments. And you will note also at this conference was Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, representing as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Last year, or now 2 years ago, in April of 2019, as SARS-CoV-2 was noted to be a pandemic, the Biodefense Summit implementation of the National Biodefense Strategy meeting occurred under the Department of Health and Human Services, United States of America. And you will notice at this conference, they emphasize under Goal 2, this goal also recognizes the dual use natures of the life sciences and biotechnology, in which the same science and technology base that improves health, promotes innovation, and protects the environment can also be misused to facilitate a biological attack. And at this conference, in discussion, you will find EcoHealth representing in the individuals who are there. EcoHealth is one of the sources funneling money, having money funneled to it from the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services and NIH, that then provides that funding to Dr. Barrick and Dr. Shang Li, as we will see in some of the upcoming materials. Despite the call for control of gain of function limitations, you will see that considerable amount of funding was provided not only to, I'll have to do it this way to point it out. Right here, you'll see Ralph Barrick, and here you will see all the EcoHealth funding. So let's go back to a large screen so you know where to look. This is Ralph Barrick with EcoHealth and all the EcoHealth funding. You will see Mr. Barrick is provided federal funding for gain of function research. And as you can see in the lower left-hand part, Health and Human Services, the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, and NIH are all providing funding for gain of function research, despite the concerns of the harm that can occur from increased infectivity and transmissibility of this virus. Just one of the examples of which we've pointed out, in addition to the HIV pseudo insert with glycoprotein 120, in addition to the prion components of the spike protein that has already been demonstrated to cross the blood-brain barrier and have increased potential for crossing with the current vaccines, thanks to the lipid coat surrounding the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. We also go to the PRRA insert, which is not seen in any other coronavirus, but which is seen, as you look down here, in rabies viruses, in the glycoprotein 120 of the HIV virus, known to be attached, thanks to Dr. Xing Li, and in cobra toxin. And as the right part showed, with this PRRA insert, the virus is more easily taken up by the cells in the brain, causing neurotoxicity. Rather than take my word for it, at this point in time, I would like to let the experts speak for themselves. This is a brief conversation with Peter Daszak here, discussing his connection with Dr. Barrick at the University of North Carolina. Oops. back that up for a moment.
But if you say these are diverse coronaviruses and you can't vaccinate against them, there are no antivirals, what do we do?
Well, so I think that coronaviruses are pretty good. I mean, you're a virologist, you know all this stuff, but you can manipulate them in the lab pretty easily. It's just spike protein drives a lot of what happens with the coronavirus, zoonotic risk. So you can get the sequence.
Emphasize here, the spike protein drives it, and you can get the genetic sequence.
And build the protein, and we work with Ralph Barrick at UNC to do this. Insert into a backbone of another virus,
right,
and do some work in the lab.
In other words, a chimer. He's admitting that EcoHealth, with the funds that have been provided from the federal government, has worked with Professor Barrick at the University of North Carolina to take one part of a coronavirus and another part of some other virus and a coronavirus and insert the spike protein that will infect people into the naturally occurring coronavirus by having the genetic sequences to do that and make a chimer. This is Professor Barrick being interviewed by an Italian investigative journalist on viruses and his work with Dr. Sheng Li, her work with them at University of North Carolina, and his work with them, with her over at Wuhan Institute of Virology.
We had no access to the viruses in China. All we had was access to the sequence.
And this is something you need to understand. Humanity no longer has to go get something and transport it from point A to point B to work with it. We don't have to go get the bits and pieces. All we have to know anymore is what it's made up of. What is the genetic code? And humanity has the ability to remake something from scratch, at least viruses. Using the genetic code that we know makes up the virus, we can then remake it. And the genetic code was sitting in the Wuhan Institute of Virology laboratory where they were investigating all these coronaviruses. Now, Dr. Barrick, Professor Barrick, is admitting that they were able to take that information and remake the coronaviruses and then mutate them together, make a chimer to make a more aggressive virus.
We had no access to the viruses in China. All we had was access to the sequence. And so you can chemically synthesize the sequence of the virus in the laboratory and make the virus sequence and then recover the virus.
Dopo l'esperimento col professor Barrick, nel 2017 il team di Wuhan pubblica le sequenze di 11 nuovi coronavirus di tipo SARS, identificati ancora nel sud della Cina, nello Yunnan. Ricombinando alcuni di questi virus in un progetto sempre cofinanziato dal governo americano, i ricercatori costruiscono 8 diverse chimere. 2 di loro sono in grado di infettare le cellule umane. La prova, ancora una volta, che i coronavirus dei pipistrelli sono pronti a fare il salto senza bisogno di passare da un altro animale.
There were 2 teams in the world who were very good at making chimeric viruses, and they were both working on SARS-like coronaviruses. One in North Carolina under Ralph Barrick, and one in Wuhan under Xi Zhengli. And they both developed techniques for combining 2 different parts of different viruses into one virus, the backbone of one virus and the spike protein from another virus.
In other words, everything to make a new virus, bits and pieces, either the lion or Frankenstein, from different viruses put together to make a brand new virus. And as they already mentioned, the key to this is developing the spike protein that will allow the attachment to enhance the ability of the virus to infect people and cause pathogenicity and harm. the very thing that the gain of function research, according to the government documents you just saw, said cannot be funded because of the potential harm to cause a pandemic. And yet, taxpayer monies used through EcoHealth, through Department of Defense, through Health and Human Services, through the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, funded this research and the development of this chimer. Now the question is, can you hide that?
They warned the world in a publication in 2015, jointly between Professor Barrick's team, Shi Zhengli's team.
What you're going to hear next should concern you even more, because here is the admission from Barrick and Zhengli that this investigative reporter found in the published documents, that they can make an even more virulent, nasty Frankenstein's monster chimer to cause a pandemic.
That they were capable of making more dangerous pathogens, and that this was a risky line of research.
Avete dato al virus una marcia in più? Lo avete potenziato?
The only gain of function that occurred in that virus is that we changed its antigenicity. And what that data tells you is that any vaccine or antibody that you'd made against the original virus from 2003 wasn't going to protect the public against this new virus if it should emerge in the future.
In other words, it's so different from the original SARS CoV-1 of 2002 that it is a completely different virus because it's a man-made chimer Frankenstein virus. And vaccines, when the virus has changed sufficiently, have no effect. And when he says the term antigenicity, this is the thing that they're talking about producing with vaccines. This is the thing that causes the immune response. The proteins, the antigen is the protein of the spike protein and the rest of the virus that has been human-made gain of function in a lab paid for by US taxpayer dollars and other sources, done through the University of North Carolina, done through Peter Daszak at EcoHealth, done with Shane Lee at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Se guardassimo il genoma della vostra chimera, capiremmo che era stata fatta in laboratorio?
Anything that we build in the laboratory has what are called signature mutations. It's like a little, it's where you signed your name almost. It says, you put in these mutations and it says this was built from material in the Barrick laboratory.
Ma se non vuoi lasciare questa firma, puoi costruire in laboratorio un virus indistinguibile da un naturale, giusto?
It is correct. You can do it without leaving a signature, yes. We're using any of the 3 or 4 different approaches for coronaviruses that were developed by different researchers. You can leave no trace that it was made in a laboratory.
I can't say that more clearly. If you do not want the world to know that you made the chimer or the Frankenstein monster, you just simply don't put your name on it. And the world will not know. And the data that existed in the Wuhan lab has been wiped from the records. Beautiful thing about electronics. There ought to be a way to find it, but the reality is this was an intentionally human-made virus with the goal of increasing the infectivity and pathogenicity. And Barrick and Zhengli, who received funds from the federal government, from HHS, from NIAID, from the Department of Defense, through EcoHealth and Peter Daszak, intentionally made viruses that were aggressive, that could infect people when the natural viruses could not, and would be a pandemic. Now, as you look at this and you consider what to do, whether you are an individual average citizen, a not so average citizen, a scientist, a physician, an elected official, an attorney, a judge, you no longer have the ability to ignore this and pretend this evidence has not been brought to you. And I present this to you as a reflection of where you should be thinking about and where you go as an individual from here in addressing this gain of function virus that has caused a pandemic and is responsible for 400,000 deaths in the United States, more than 1.6 or 7 million or whatever it is now in the world, and infected tens of millions of people.
None of us know our end, really, or what hand will guide us there. A king may move a man. A father may claim a son. That man can also move himself. And only then does that man truly begin his own game. Remember that howsoever you are played, or by whom, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even though those who presume to play you be kings and men of power, when you stand before God, you cannot say, but I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. Remember that.
Remember that. You now have an obligation to take this information out and share it with people. The first step to stopping the manipulation and control by other individuals, whether they be men of power, politicians, whomever, is to bring that knowledge forward and to act upon it. The first step in understanding how to address SARS-CoV-2 is understanding that it is not a naturally occurring virus, that it is a man-made modified virus, and by all legal rights, it represents a violation of the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty because it has produced a pandemic devastation upon the planet. It is a biological weapon that has been funded by mankind, made by mankind. SARS-CoV-2 represents our chimera, our Frankenstein monster that must be addressed. And rather than having the erratic behavior of burning down the village like the villagers did in Frankenstein's movies, we have the obligation intelligently to address this, to go after those, investigate and prosecute those responsible for doing this, and to take this knowledge-based information and use it as we address and control this pandemic. We must approach it as a biological weapon, and we must treat it as a virus that needs to be aggressively treated to stop the attachment and replication and to stop the inflammation and blood clotting response that is the result of it. Then and only then can we put an end to this nightmare. But then and only then will we be able to put an end to this nightmare. This is not beyond our control, but it does mean that we must stand up and accept the responsibility of going after these people to make sure this never happens again, and to allow physicians to treat patients in the way that they need to be, and to quit blocking those treatments. And the people blocking those treatments are the same government agencies that paid for this virus to be developed in the first place. This is Dr. Richard Fleming, and today is Friday, the 22nd of January, 2021.